expansion was discussed both at a committee level and at the board, and ultimately the league office was tasked.
A 30-second television spot was all it took to allegedly send the highest offices of professional basketball into absolute chaos and rewrite the entire power dynamic of modern sports media. For decades, the establishment has carefully controlled the image, the marketing, and the financial narratives of its biggest stars, ensuring that no single athlete ever truly eclipses the shield of the league itself. But the moment Caitlin Clark's breathtaking new commercial hit the airwaves, that carefully maintained illusion shattered overnight, exposing a reality that the front office had been desperately trying to hide. Rumors immediately began swirling that Commissioner Adam Silver was absolutely livid, not because the ad was poorly made, but because it boldly positioned a rookie as an entity entirely separate from, and perhaps far more powerful than, the league itself. It was a stunning display of corporate leverage that completely bypassed the traditional gatekeepers, broadcasting a subtle but unmistakable message to millions of viewers that the true center of gravity in basketball had fundamentally shifted away from the boardroom and directly into the hands of one transcendent player. This wasn't just a sneaker ad or a sports drink promotion. It was a declaration of independence that exposed the glaring financial realities of the sport, leaving executives scrambling to figure out how they lost control of their biggest asset before her career had even fully begun. But that wasn't the whole story, because the seeds for this massive boardroom clash were actually planted long before the cameras ever started rolling on that secretive commercial set. To understand the sheer panic gripping the front office, you have to look at the unprecedented momentum this young star brought with her the moment she decided to turn pro, carrying a cultural weight that the league was completely unprepared to handle. Never in the history of the sport had a single player single-handedly dictated television ratings, sold out opposing arenas in minutes, and dominated the daily sports conversation quite like this, making her a one-woman economic stimulus package for every city she visited. Networks were tripping over themselves to secure broadcasting rights, and massive multinational corporations were bypassing the league's official partnership channels entirely to sign exclusive, staggering deals directly with her representation. The establishment was initially thrilled to ride the wave of this massive popularity, happily calculating the insane revenue spikes, the record-breaking merchandise sales, and the massive uptick in global viewership. They thought they had found the ultimate golden goose, a polite, incredibly talented rookie who would quietly smile for the cameras, wear the league-approved gear, and follow the traditional path of paying her dues, while the executives reaped the massive financial rewards and took credit for the sport's sudden explosion in popularity. And what happened next would shock everyone, because her elite management team had an entirely different blueprint in mind, one that didn't involve waiting in line or asking for permission to build a billion-dollar empire. When the heavily anticipated commercial finally dropped during prime time, completely unannounced to the league's PR department, it was an absolute masterclass in brand positioning that left league officials completely blindsided and frantically dialing their legal teams. Instead of featuring her in the standard, league-sanctioned uniform surrounded by official logos and the usual safe, family-friendly corporate messaging, the spot presented her as a fierce global icon, existing entirely outside the standard basketball ecosystem. The visuals were cinematic, moody, and entirely focused on her individual brand, featuring subtle imagery that emphasized her massive worth, her undeniable cultural impact, and her complete independence from the traditional sports machine. It was a brilliant, high-budget spectacle that made her look like a mega corporation all on her own, completely ignoring the traditional hierarchy that usually forces rookies to share the spotlight with established veterans or prominent league branding. Fans went absolutely wild, dissecting every single frame on social media, analyzing the hidden meanings behind the wardrobe choices, and praising the incredibly bold artistic direction that felt more like a high-end fashion campaign than a sports promo. But behind closed doors at the headquarters in New York, the mood was reportedly anything but celebratory, with sources claiming the atmosphere was incredibly tense and filled with yelling. Insiders quickly leaked whispers of an emergency morning meeting, with sources claiming that the commissioner's office was absolutely reeling from the implications of a rookie stepping so far outside the established corporate lines without seeking official blessing. But the real issue wasn't just the artistic direction of the ad itself, but the undeniable hidden message it sent to the entire sports world regarding athlete compensation and true market value. For years, the conversation surrounding the massive pay disparity between the men's and women's leagues had been a persistent, glaring thorn in the side of the executives, a public relations nightmare they constantly tried to smooth over, with vague promises of future growth, slow-moving CBA negotiations, and gradual revenue sharing. This commercial, however, took a massive, unavoidable spotlight and shined it directly on the uncomfortable truth that the league had been avoiding. By showcasing a staggering, multi-million-dollar corporate endorsement on primetime television, completely funded by outside money, the ad inadvertently highlighted the absolute absurdity of her official rookie salary, which barely cracked the low six figures and looked like pocket change compared to her endorsement deals. It made the league look incredibly cheap and woefully behind the times, completely exposing the fact that the biggest draw in the sport was making pennies from her actual employer while pulling in unprecedented generational wealth from outside brands who actually recognized her true, staggering market value. The optics were a total disaster for the establishment, painting them not as pioneers of the sport or champions of women's athletics, but as outdated, stingy middlemen trying to stubbornly profit off a generational talent they couldn't even afford to pay properly. Which brings us to the rumored explosive reaction from the commissioner himself, a man historically known for his incredibly calm, measured, and diplomatic public persona. Sources suggest that seeing a rookie's independent brand completely dwarf the league's own multi-million-dollar marketing efforts was the ultimate wake-up call, sparking a furious internal debate about how to handle athletes whose star power simply outgrows the structural confines of the system. You have to realize that the entire modern business model of professional sports relies heavily on the central authority, maintaining a tight, iron-fisted grip on sponsorships, media narratives, broadcasting negotiations, and overall player visibility. When a single player can drop a commercial that organically generates more social media engagement, more mainstream news coverage, and more cultural conversation in 24 hours than the league's own official championship marketing campaign does in a month, that historical power dynamic completely flips on its head. Executives were allegedly terrified that this masterful power play would set a dangerous new precedent, heavily inspiring future draft classes to bypass the traditional media machine entirely, hire their own production companies, and build their own independent empires, essentially rendering the league's massive marketing department completely obsolete. It was a total loss of narrative control, and the panic was reportedly palpable as PR teams frantically tried to figure out how to spin the situation without looking incredibly petty, deeply insecure, or unsupportive of the very star who was currently keeping their viewership numbers at record highs. But the executives sitting in high-rise offices weren't the only ones feeling the intense heat from this massive cultural moment. The locker rooms across the sport were reportedly buzzing with a very different, much more complicated kind of energy, as established veterans watched a first-year player completely rewrite the unwritten rules of engagement and respect. For players who had spent a decade grinding through the unforgiving system, dutifully taking the low-paying league-approved deals, playing overseas in the off-season just to make ends meet, and strictly abiding by the unwritten rules of professional hierarchy, seeing a newcomer immediately secure a solo brand presence that rivaled the absolute biggest names in the history of sports was a bitter, difficult pill to swallow. Whispers of deep jealousy and quiet resentment began to leak into the sports press, with anonymous sources hinting that the overwhelming, singular focus on one individual was highly disrespectful to the pioneers who had bled to pave the way for this exact moment. Of course, almost nobody wanted to go on the record and complain directly to the cameras, knowing full well the massive, unforgiving fan backlash that would instantly follow from her incredibly loyal followers. But the underlying tension was undeniably, palpably there in every post-game press conference. The commercial had become a massive cultural lightning rod, completely exposing the deep generational divides, shifting loyalties, and changing economics within the sport, proving that incredible, undeniable talent paired with massive corporate backing could completely shatter the traditional timeline of earning respect and paying dues. The old guard felt entirely left behind, realizing that the new economy of sports wasn't about longevity or loyalty to the league, but about absolute viral reach and undeniable corporate leverage. So how exactly is the league trying to put this raging fire out before it completely consumes their carefully managed, deeply entrenched ecosystem? Behind the scenes, massive, incredibly expensive damage control efforts are reportedly underway, with executives desperately trying to draft new, sweeping marketing initiatives that somehow bring her massive independent brand back under the official, league-sanctioned umbrella. There are intense rumors of rushed backdoor negotiations, frantic emergency phone calls to major corporate partners begging for synergy, and a desperate, transparent push to feature her even more prominently in official league materials, to create the convincing illusion that they are still the ones successfully steering the ship. They are allegedly offering unprecedented compromises, trying to blend her independent sponsors with league sponsors, attempting to desperately patch the massive hole she just blew through their traditional business model. But the harsh reality they are slowly waking up to is that the toothpaste is already completely out of the tube, and absolutely no amount of frantic corporate maneuvering, sweet-talking, or aggressive PR spinning can change the fundamental fact that the landscape has permanently and irreversibly shifted. The commercial brilliantly proved that a player with enough cultural gravity, insane talent, and massive public backing simply doesn't need the league to validate their worth. They themselves are the ultimate validation, and the league needs them far more than they need the league. Furthermore, this dynamic has massive implications for the upcoming collective bargaining agreement, which insiders now say will be an absolute bloodbath because of the precedent this single commercial just set. The Players' Union is reportedly watching this entire saga unfold with intense interest, taking detailed notes on exactly how much leverage a star can wield when backed by unlimited corporate sponsor money, and planning to use this exact situation as a battering ram to demand radically higher revenue splits, larger roster spots, and better travel conditions. The executives know that if they push back too hard against their golden goose, she has the absolute power to simply walk away, focus entirely on her global brand, or even launch a competing venture, taking millions of newly minted fans directly with her and leaving the establishment completely high and dry. This fear is precisely what is driving the alleged rage in the commissioner's office. It's the terrifying realization of their own sudden irrelevance in the face of an unstoppable cultural phenomenon. The days of executives dictating terms to superstars from a position of absolute power are rapidly coming to an end, replaced by an era where the athletes function as their own independent media conglomerates, wielding more power, more reach, and more financial independence than the billionaire owners who historically pulled all the strings from the shadows. As the dust slowly continues to settle from this massive corporate showdown, and the commercial continues to rack up hundreds of millions of views across every social platform, it leaves us with an incredibly fascinating, undeniably vital question about the entire future of professional athletics worldwide. We are actively witnessing the dramatic, messy birth of a new era, where the traditional gatekeepers are being forced to completely adapt or face total obsolescence. The establishment might be raging right now, desperately trying to cling to a deeply flawed, highly centralized model of control that has enriched them for decades. But the ultimate truth is that a single, incredibly powerful 30-second commercial just proved to the entire world that the old rules simply no longer apply to the truly exceptional. The game has changed forever, both on the hardwood and in the boardroom. And the fans are left to wonder just how far this bold new generation of superstars will push the boundaries of their power, and exactly what the traditional gatekeepers will do when they finally, painfully realize they are no longer the most important people in the room. And as more players begin to quietly study this exact blueprint, realizing that true power lies in direct connection with the audience rather than obedience to the front office, the entire foundation of sports marketing is set to experience an earthquake the likes of which we have never seen. But that wasn't the whole story either, because the fallout from this massive shift extended far beyond the immediate shock of the commercial itself, bleeding into the very fabric of how upcoming prospects view their own potential futures. High school phenomena and college standouts who are just beginning their ascents are now watching this masterclass in leverage and completely reevaluating their own strategies, tossing out the old playbooks that told them to just put their heads down and wait their turn. They are actively hiring brand managers and digital strategists before they even hire traditional sports agents, fully understanding that building a massive, independent audience is the ultimate shield against low rookie contracts and restrictive league policies. The power has shifted entirely to the creators, the athletes who hold the attention of the masses, and the commercial was simply the incredibly loud, undeniable starting gun for this new revolution. The tension in the executive suites is no longer just about one player stepping out of line. It's an existential dread about a rapidly approaching future, where the league itself is viewed merely as a stage, rather than the undisputed owner of the show. Adam Silver's alleged frustration isn't just about losing control of a single news cycle. It's the agonizing realization that the meticulously constructed system of leverage, a system designed to keep labor cheap and management powerful, has been permanently cracked by the sheer force of an athlete who refused to play entirely by their rules. And what happened next would shock everyone, because instead of backing down or issuing a standard PR-approved apology for overshadowing the league, her camp reportedly doubled down, quietly finalizing even more lucrative, independent deals that further cemented her status as a standalone empire. It was an incredibly bold, almost ruthless display of business acumen that sent a clear, chilling message to the front office. The old ways of doing business are completely dead, and if you want to remain relevant, you have to completely redesign the entire structure of the league to accommodate the absolute giants of the new era. Ultimately, this 30-second visual masterpiece did far more than just sell a product or elevate a personal brand. It acted as a massive, high-definition mirror, reflecting the outdated absurdities of a deeply flawed sports economy, forcing everyone involved to violently confront a reality they had been trying to ignore for years. The establishment's rage is simply the very loud, very public sound of their own absolute monopoly finally crumbling under the immense, undeniable weight of true, individual superstar power.